Tekken 2 was my first Tekken game, and at that time, I had no clue that 3D fighting games were even a thing. My only experience with fighting games so far just being the new challengers on the SNES and getting my ass kicked by my older brother's Ryu.
You win! Perfect!
But now, this was a new era and the tides had turned. And while I really loved the new challengers, I had played it pretty casually. On the other hand, I was absolutely obsessed with Tekken 2. I couldn't stop playing it until I knew all the little details on every single stage. The worldwide locations brought me to places I'd never even heard of, and Kazuya's theme was stuck in my head for weeks. I didn't have the chance to play Tekken 1 until much later in life, and at that point I was a lot older, so I feel like my experience with this series' first game wasn't quite as magical. It felt very clunky and was hella busted. Though to be fair, Tekken 2 also feels like this, and as iconic as the first two Tekken games are in retrospect, at the time, they weren't exactly revolutionary. Tekken had just been copying off Virtua Fighter and didn't feel all too good to play. But to give the series some credit, 1 and 2 were the stepping stones for the series to become legendary with its third iteration, which arguably was the defining game of the Tekken series. But we'll talk about that some other time. Today, I want to talk about Tekken 1 and 2 only, specifically focusing on the PlayStation versions since that's what most people would have been exposed to, though I still will talk about the arcade versions and other console ports where appropriate. Tekken 1 is hard to play legitimately these days, though it has been re-released on the PS3, PSP, and PS2 through Tekken 5's arcade history. If you're gonna play any version of Tekken 1 though, I do recommend doing it on the PlayStation port. Despite the floors being higher fidelity in the arcade version, with the higher processing power that came with the hardware, the PlayStation version added CG cutscene endings and rearranged music. Also, just a fun little fact, in both the arcade and PlayStation versions of Tekken 1, you can actually change the camera angle in the first 5 seconds, so you can look at the floor in case you needed to disorient your opponent, which is definitely an advantage I needed. Tekken 2 had a number of added features compared to 1, like time attack mode and survival mode, and really just modes in general, though it did take away that camera change. It was also the only game to have cheat codes that unlocked a number of secrets that allowed you to see the game in a different light. My personal theory is that the developers may have just put these in for fun and forgotten to take them out before shipping, since there's no proper cheat codes in any other Tekken game before or after 2. These differences aside, fundamentally, you had very similar player experiences in both 1 and 2. Personally, the main thing I think makes 1 and 2 stand out from the later games is the overall tone and atmosphere to its stages. In Tekken 1 and 2, there's a very liminal bent to all of the areas, almost haunting, where everyone on Earth besides your fighters have seemingly been raptured. The lack of walls makes these areas expansive and infinite, which contrasts heavily against some of the more interesting music choices. Overall, I would say the general tone of these stages doesn't make a ton of sense to me because the backgrounds often don't match the music, which in turn doesn't match the theming of the main menu, which is very bold and brash with metallic textures and the exact opposite of liminal. To me, there's a noticeable lack of cohesion within some of the stages. And don't get me wrong, it's totally fine to have lots of different stages be all over the place in tone since this really keeps in theme with the more globe-trotting aspect, but a lack of cohesion within the individual stages, and it's less forgivable to me. Tekken 2 did a better job with this kind of internal stage cohesion than 1, but it still has plenty of examples where I can point to this. Tekken 1 is a globetrotter like Virtua Fighter and Street Fighter, where their stages are based on realistic places. Tekken 2 followed a similar theme, but had more abstract locations, not necessarily based on actual spots. I should also mention that almost all the stages transferred from the first game to the second. In Tekken 2, most of the secret characters had their stages ripped straight from Tekken 1. Also, pretty sure the Tekken 1 backgrounds were taken from stock photos, and while I couldn't find the original source of these backgrounds, you can see the names of the stage locations in the lower right corner, making it much easier for me to track down where they took inspiration from. Comparing some of those stages from 1 to 2 generally, I think that Tekken 2's stages did a better job at reflecting the personality of their fighters, particularly in the music. To me, the music says a lot more about some of these characters than the actual stages in a lot of cases. Should also mention that Tekken 2 added actual lighting effects, whereas in Tekken 1 you had implied lighting with the shading on the characters. All that being said, on a higher level, let's finally dive into talking about all the stage details with our first game and stage. Kyoto is based on Heian Shrine in Kyoto, Japan. This is actually one of the newer shrines in the city, built in 1895, and parts of the structure attempted to replicate the original imperial palace. The temple is quite serene with the muted greens and blues, but the saturated bright sky adds an energetic, sunny ambiance. In real life, I would expect the floor to be made of dirt, but instead there seems to be some kind of white sand on the ground and a stone path in the shape of a cross. Your characters must have come here at a weird time too, since this place would probably be quite busy with tourists during the day, but again, there's no one here. I do think this sparseness kind of works though, as the actual temple is quite large and the space helps convey that sense of scale. With a Japanese style stage, you also have a traditional sounding tune in the PlayStation port, but with Western elements included as well. The melodies sound like they could have been played on traditional Japanese flutes, similar to the famous shakuhachi flute sampler, while some traditional percussion elements are included, such as the use of the gong between verses. The arrangement itself is more Western in that it's synthesized with electronic beats, arpeggios, and synthesized tones. The arpeggios add to the intensity of the song, though towards the end, the character changes quite a bit with more of a brighter and gentle sound. This song also appears in Smash Ultimate. The arcade song stays true to its East Asian roots, but has an arrangement that's more like the modern 90s themes from the dance and techno music of the time. The melodies sound like something that would be played on a Japanese flute, but synthesized. Overall, the tone of the stage is seriously amped up by the energizing music. If it weren't for that, I think the more liminal nature of the stage and some of the more muted colors would shine through, but because the song is so powerful, you have an overall very lively ambiance. King George Island is about 75 miles north of Antarctica and is part of a cluster called the South Shetland Islands. It's named after King George III of England, and ownership of the island has been in flux since it's been claimed by England as well as Chile and Argentina, which are the two closest countries to the island. Stage-wise, your characters stand on a sheet of ice that bobs up and down in the water, the only object in the background being these icebergs and a light snow coming down. Interestingly, there isn't a ton of temperature variation on this island, ranging from -7°C to 2°C, or about 20 Fahrenheit to 35 Fahrenheit throughout the year. I'm no climatologist, but given rising temperatures and it not really being all that freezing compared to other areas of Antarctica, I'm not sure that these huge ice sheets that you'd be able to walk on are actually realistic nowadays. Also, this stage is probably the one that most comes to mind for me when I think of liminal space, with a very white blank background and not a ton of high contrast details. You hear a wind effect in the background music combined with reverb, synthetic choir, and a bell sound, which emphasizes the wide space and lack of walls. As the song progresses, it does pick up a horn melody, making the tone more intimidating and foreboding. The arrangement is also less busy than some of the other songs, which makes the music feel that much more desolate. Also, a fun fact is that this song uses the same sample as the song Emerald City Sequence from the film The Wiz. The arcade version of the song is similar but has more percussion and lacks the bell sounds, so the song is a bit busier and you do lose some of that more chilling ambiance. This stage's sparseness along with the music draws the weight of your focus onto your characters rather than the environment. It adds this more serious tone where if you lose here, then there are consequences. The ambient sound effects and space work well together, and this is a pretty solid stage. Angkor Wat is a Hindu-Buddhist temple complex in Cambodia. Built in the 12th century, it's fairly unique in that it was originally a Hindu temple, but over the years, gradually converted into a Buddhist one. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and major tourist attraction. The complex houses more than 1,000 buildings and was only one of numerous projects that were built during the reign of the Khmer Empire, which itself was one of the most sophisticated civilizations in Southeast Asia. Going to the stage, you can see palm trees, trees, and inside the courtyard of the temple, which was built from a stone and clay soil mixture called laterite in the Khmer architectural style. Music-wise, the song for both the arcade and PlayStation versions is almost a bit sinister with the brass in the background. The various tribal percussion and flourishes kept me very engaged while listening though, and I really like the song a lot. Unlike the King George stage, I wouldn't call this one liminal because there is so much going on in the background with the temple. The dark colored stone does match with what the complex looks like in real life, and when compared against the purples and muddy greens and the tribal sounding music, it lends a little bit of a mysterious vibe, like something could just pop out of the woodworks to surprise you. Your characters are on a rooftop overlooking Chicago at night. I personally don't recognize any of these landmarks here, having lived in Chicago, and the cityscape does feel a bit generic, so if I had to put down money, I don't think this picture was actually taken in Chicago, but the background is very dark, so perhaps I'm mistaken here. It's a nighttime cityscape, and it does give me similar vibes to the Dead or Alive 1 highway stage, but with less interesting stage elements. Just less things to look at overall. You can only really see the foreground, buildings, and lights, and not much else. The stage song starts off tense, with this descending synth sound and striking melody. There's a back and forth where these minor scale sections heavily contrast against major scale sections, which then transitions into this more dreamy, airy composition. Could be missing something, but nothing here really screams Chicago to me either. Just a lot of techno and instrumentation. Nothing really genre defining in the way of jazz or blues, which Chicago has a long history with. As far as overall stage impression, you do get some tenseness with the song and being on the roof of a building, which adds some dramatic weight to the fight. Otherwise, it just kind of feels lifeless to me. The gray tiles of the floor with the black sky and the black skyscrapers make this whole area very dark, but not in an attractive way. For such a bumping city, you think it would be a lot more lively here. Lake Windermere is located in Lake District National Park in Cumbria, England. Apparently, this is a popular place for fighting games, since Cammy's stage in Street Fighter 2 is also inspired by this area. You have a saturated and sunny color palette, with the lake encompassed by rolling hills. It's upbeat and calm, with trees and rocks adding visual interest. For whatever reason, you start off on this stone checkerboard flooring, which then becomes grass and dirt as you move outward. In direct contrast to the background though, the music seems a little unnecessarily tense. It's edgy and dark with these bell sounds at the beginning and a sax melody later on. Honestly, it's just more like something I would expect in the Chicago stage, so not sure why they put it in this one. To me, the stage is just okay. I think the background is a little generic since it could be any lake here, and you wouldn't be able to tell this is Lake Windermere. The bright saturation of the grass against the sky is kind of overwhelming, and again is a completely different stage compared to what we're hearing. A stage that has that same visual energy, but in my opinion does it better, is Stadium. Marine Stadium is based on Zozo Marine Stadium, an outdoor baseball field in Chiba, Japan. Home console versions of the stage were renamed to just Stadium, perhaps to avoid legal issues. This is my favorite stage and song in Tekken 1 because of the vivid blocky colors and energetic synth tune. There's just something about this stage that feels like classic Tekken to me. On the stage itself, there's a home and pitcher's plate on the ground, and signs that I presume are supposed to be little references. Ishii could be referring to Seiichi Ishii, the designer and director of Tekken 1 and 2 before Harada took over, and Nakata could be Kunihiko Nakata, who is a character designer on 1, but this is total speculation. I'm also not sure about the other two words. There's a lot of detail to the background, such as these stadium lights at top, and these red things, which I think might be stadium padding or maybe seating. You also have the floor, which has different shades of green grass instead of just one color, which adds some additional depth. There's a screen in the background that mirrors the fight in the PlayStation version, though the HUD is removed here. This is an idea that is actually used again in Tekken 2, which we'll talk about later. Also, the arcade version just has a blue sphere on screen. There is no mirroring. Both the arcade and PlayStation songs sound like typical arcade fighter music at the time, with an electronic drum beat in 4/4 that emphasizes beats 2 and 4. The music is very synthesized, and the only minor difference between the two songs is the choice of instrumentation. The primary colors, dynamic stage elements, and that classic sort of Tekken upbeat electronic sound makes Stadium one of my favorites from this game. It's just so spirited and just pure distilled Tekken energy. Our next stage is based on the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. For context, Acropolises were used as temples, fortresses, religious centers, and living quarters for the wealthy. Each ancient Greek city had its own Acropolis, though the one in Athens is the most famous. Situated above on a hill that overlooks the rest of the city, the Athenian citadel was built over the course of many years, with the most famous building, the Parthenon, built in the 5th century BC, which is the main structure in the background here. The entire stage is crumbling and in ruins, which is actually pretty in line with what you see when you go up on the plateau where the Parthenon is. Also, weirdly in the back, it looks like you're surrounded by water, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me since the ocean isn't right next to Athens. There's still about 20 kilometers or so to get there, but maybe I'm mistaken and you can see the ocean clearly from the plateau. The stage music starts off with a strong snare drum, which then transitions into synth that lends an air of mystique, which suits the tone of this stage. I do think the arcade version is slightly faster than the PlayStation version, but overall it doesn't change the character of the song much. This stage is trying to give off a very subdued and mysterious vibe with the purple gradient sky, the emptiness of the stage, crumbling ruins, and airy soundtrack. I think it's pretty successful in its direction, though one little thing I might tweak is the color of the Parthenon, which is a bit dark because of the shadows. The stage has a levity to it that I think is dragged down by the black color. The real-life Monument Valley is in Arizona Navajo country, an area famous for its red sandstone buttes and the location of many famous Western films. On the stage, you can see the Western Mitten Butte, and behind it, the sun slowly sinking beneath the horizon as the battle progresses, with the sky becoming darker and darker, which, when combined with the music, definitely gives a sinister ambiance. The sunset color changes much more dramatically in the arcade version compared to the PlayStation, though it still happens in both. It's extremely rare to have any sort of background movement in these early stages, so it really threw me off in a good way when I saw the sun actually setting. Music-wise, a very foreboding stage song. It starts off with ambient noises and howling wind effects, and then layers on these very discordant vocals, which makes the stage tone more creepy and mysterious. It's almost like the song is asking you a question. What exactly is gonna happen once the sun sets? However, you never actually get the answer to that question because even when the sun sets behind the horizon, it's still very bright out for some reason. Inconsistencies aside, the colors are very attractive, initially very warm with oranges and yellows and a hint of blue, so you might think that the stage is supposed to be more optimistic and cheery. But once you hear that synthesized choir drop and see the sun setting, you're hit with that anticipatory dread of something about to go down. While in other stages, I haven't been a huge fan of the visuals and sound contrasting greatly within a stage, here I think it works like a charm because it really plays with your expectations. Fiji is an island country in Oceania, some 2,500 kilometers or about 1,600 miles north of New Zealand. The country contains a cluster of over 330 islands and many smaller islets. It's well known for its tropical weather and beautiful coastline. The stage itself could take place on any number of the islands. The features here are a bit simplistic and have elements that you'd probably find at most of the beaches in Fiji, with the white sand and clear blue water. I do really like the gradient we see with the blues of the ocean and the sky and the colors of the stage. However, nothing about this one really screams Fiji to me. Same goes for the music. It has a tropical feel to it with the steel drums, horns, and electronic piano, but you could tell me this was for a stage in, I don't know, the Caribbean, and I'd probably believe you. I do like the verse of the arrangement, which features a heavier techno influence where the chords of the synthesizer are played over electronic piano arpeggios. Also, not something we're gonna get into today, but I should mention there's a remix version of this song in Tekken Tag 2 with Lee's beach stage. This is a classic beach setting, an archetype we see all the time now in fighting games, and Tekken 1 really nails that look with vibrant colors, tropical music, and clear blue water. Only thing is, I just wish it was a little more obvious this place was Fiji. So the stage name Sichuan has been localized here interestingly. It's not incorrect per se, but typically I see it like spelt with a U instead of a W, or like the romanized version of the name, which is spelled like Sichuan. Regardless of how you spell it though, it's all referring to the same place. Sichuan province is a southwest region of China known for their spicy, numbing style of food and giant pandas. This region also has many mountains, which is why perhaps we see them in the background of this stage. Looks like it hasn't rained in a while either, with the cracked dirt on the floor. Also, this is kind of hard to see, but there's a small temple nestled at the base of some low mountains. Similar to the Fiji stage though, there's really nothing here that conveys Sichuan to me. I mean, maybe in the mountains, but the average player wouldn't be able to tell this wasn't a specific area of China. I applaud the fact that they did do something besides just like the Great Wall of China, though this isn't Tekken 2, or the Forbidden City. Perhaps to be a bit more Sichuan style though, they could have put some bamboo in the background or something. The music is a bit of a fusion piece. It prominently features what sounds like a theremin playing East Asian scale tones. Also features some melodies that might be played on a yangqing, which is a traditional Chinese plucked instrument. These tasteful choices pay homage to what would otherwise be a very Western techno-style song. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the colors in this stage, which I think are too similar to each other and aren't that aesthetically pleasing. I do like the song though, but I don't think the upbeat music matches with the visuals. You get this intensity from the music, but the actual stage conveys a sense of tranquility with the mountains and the small temple. It's not really a place I'd go to for a fight. Venezia is based on Venice, Italy, very close to St. Mark's Plaza, which is the most famous public square in the city. Right off the bat, you can see these pillars, which I believe are supposed to be the columns of San Marco and San Todoro, though there seems to be more than just 2 columns on this platform for whatever reason. The building in between the columns is the Palazzo Ducale, or Doge's Palace. St. Mark's Bell Tower is the clock tower looking structure to the right of that. In real life, I think the platform your characters are on is actually just made up, since this area should be just water, but maybe I'm missing something here due to the perspective. Also, really surprised there's no one here because this is one of the most popular tourist attractions in Italy. The music sounds very classical with the piano, synthesized vocals, and oboe, accompanied by little flute flourishes until it opens into more of an opera-like section, giving it a sort of grandiose flair. In terms of overall pace, you definitely see the heavy Italian influence in the stage appearance, just this gorgeous architectural playground with lots of little nooks and crannies. Given that there's no people in this stage though, it does come off as a little more tranquil. I do think the song is a little overdone compared to the vibe of the stage, which should be a bit more laid back, but that is a minor complaint. Like I mentioned before, in addition to the 10 stages carried over from Tekken 1, Tekken 2 added several abstract stages into the mix for a total of 23 stages. However, the majority remain inspired by real-life locations from all over the world. Of the added stages, all the secret character ones reuse songs from Tekken 1 as their stage theme, so no new music there. But you still had plenty of new songs that came along with the 13 added stages, which generally did a good job at conveying the personalities of the fighters, more so than even their stages. Both the arcade and PlayStation versions of Tekken 2 use 2D backgrounds, with the visuals being pretty much identical except for the floors, which to my eyes seem a bit more detailed in the arcade version. In addition to the PlayStation home console port, you also had ports on the phone and the Zeebo, which I won't be getting into this video. But as far as I can tell, the Zeebo version had almost the exact same soundtrack as the arcade, just rearranged in MIDI form. All of that being said, let's talk stages. Serene Forest takes the #1 spot for best stage ambiance in Tekken 2 for me. Your fighters are in a pine tree forest, the lone bright spot being your characters illuminated by the sunlight breaking through treetops. The backdrop has this haziness underscored by muted greens and browns, with towering trees that put your characters into perspective, how small they are in comparison. Combined with the vocals, which reminds me of a Buddhist chant, and the sparse instrumentation, you can't help but feel a sense of awe and spiritual presence. There's what sounds like a koto, Japanese flutes like a shakuhachi, and percussion. Slowly, the arrangement adds more electronic elements, such as a Western electronic backbeat, and synthesized overlays that come and go. The arcade song is completely different, a lot more chaotic with all sorts of percussion, this repetitive flourish, and just a chaotic, discordant feel to it. I like it, but not as much as the home version song, which to me is perfection. Unfortunately, that song would not come back in any future games. I have a feeling this might be because of the vocals, where they would have to pay royalties to whoever sang the song, but I can't confirm this for certain. The atmosphere is very tranquil yet subdued through the use of very few colors and selective lighting in the stage, along with the more mysterious tone lent by the chanting in the stage song. It's also reflective of Yoshimitsu's character, who is shrouded in mystery and you never really know who's behind the mask. For sure a standout environment among the Tekken 2 stages. My best guess is that Korean Temple is supposed to be the Namdaemun Gate in Seoul, South Korea. It's one of the 8 gates that comprise the Seoul City Wall and originally was the southern boundary of the city during the Joseon Dynasty. Based on this image, I think we're looking at the backside of the gate. There might be some historical embellishment going on in the background since the actual gate is surrounded by the city now and not these additional structures. Weirdly though, this stone pathway doesn't line up with the stairs, though maybe this is because of the perspective. There is also a pebble line path that connects to the main stone pathway. Not sure why they put in 2 different types of stone paths, but the contrast in textures is a nice touch. Music-wise, this song has a lot of chaotic energy. The arcade song alternates between 2 notes before throwing in discordant synth and flute noises. Just this cacophony of all these different noises that somehow works. The PlayStation version is rearranged off of the arcade song, but with more flourishes and slightly different instrumentation, but still overall very similar. This stage, while not bad, doesn't really strike any sort of chord with me. There is no strong feeling I take away from this stage other than it's more traditional. To me, the main driver of this ambivalence is probably the use of color, which is a bit bland on the temple, though it is cool to see all the different structures in the backdrop. The song also just doesn't build up the atmosphere in the same way we saw with the Serene Forest song. I praised Tekken 1 for going outside the box with its China stage, and now I kinda have to backpedal on that because we have the Great Wall of China. I've talked about the Great Wall in some of my other videos, so I won't go into detail here on the history, but one thing that's a bit different from other stages I've seen is the fog settling on the hills, with the layers adding a sense of depth to the stage that blends into the sky. In contrast to the darker tone colors of the stage, the song is very light and ethereal at the beginning and not traditionally Asian sounding like you might expect. You have this percussion in the background before the song transitions to a smooth electric groove accentuated by various ambient noises. This song gives off futuristic feels, which I do enjoy, but again, maybe just not a great match for a stage with the Great Wall in it. The arcade version, on the other hand, is in line with what you'd expect, complete with sections where all the instruments play together in unison and gongs. Similar to the last stage, this one is also okay. I don't get a strong sense of tone other than being an Asian stage, and I'm not a huge fan of the color scheme with the same muddy green and brownish palette. One thing I do think is better though is the PlayStation song, which gives off a calming, laid-back vibe and is my favorite aspect of this stage, probably because it doesn't match with the visuals all too well. Nowhere Desert looks similar to Monument Valley from Tekken 2, though this stage takes place during the middle of the day instead. There's a large arch in the background, as well as 2 smaller ones in the distance, which makes me think this is Arches National Park, and that this is the north window with the smaller ones being Turret Arch and South Window. For some quick context, Arches National Park is located in Utah and is home to over 2,000 sandstone arches, all in different stages of formation, which were made over the course of millions of years. My favorite feature of this stage is how the reddish-orange of the arches and the sandstone visually contrast against the bright blue of the sky. Not only does the stage look similar to Monument Valley though, you actually have the same song here, which we already covered. Again, there are minor differences between the arcade and PlayStation song, but they're largely the same. Unlike the stage that originally used this song, I think that the anticipation and the dread that came with that one doesn't really carry over here. That feeling is negated by the really bright blue saturation and sunny weather. The song doesn't match the stage, which takes away from its overall direction. I think changing the song to something more upbeat would have been far more appropriate here. We've got multiple desert-themed stages to get through, so let's get straight into Arizona Desert. It takes place at either dusk or early morning with this beautiful blue-green sky. The sun is shining on nearby buttes and rock formations, illuminating the entire stage in a golden light, along with what could be a light fog dusting the ground. The arcade and PlayStation song are absolutely great. One of my favorites from this game, and is an upbeat little piece with synth, strong percussion, as well as a funky piano feature towards the end. Genre-wise, it is your typical arcade fighter techno music, but this does not take away from its charm. The pastel colors of the sky here are so stunning, and combined with the upbeat stage song, if this was like an English literature class, I'd describe it as starting your day off strong with a pot of black coffee. It's optimistic and bouncy, while also being fairly focused in stage direction. This game loves its Southwest American locations. The Grand Canyon stage is based on Grand Canyon State Park, about a 3.5-hour drive north of Phoenix, Arizona. The park is named after its stunning main attraction, which is almost 300 miles long and 1 mile deep, or 446 kilometers long and 1,800 meters deep. Quick history is that the Grand Canyon was created when layers of rock formed around 2 billion years ago, after which the whole area was lifted, creating the Colorado Plateau. Then, about 5 to 6 million years ago, the Colorado River carved through the rock, forming the canyon we see today and the one you can see in the background of this stage. Similar to Arizona Desert, you've got a radiant golden light, but more of a blue sky with clouds drifting overhead, all while your players stand on top of a plateau with mesas in the backdrop. I really like how part of the stage is more shadowed than the other, with some stormy clouds above blocking the light. The darker shadows here give the stage more of a grounded tone. The stage music was borrowed from Stadium in Tekken 1, so again, I won't get into this too much. But like the Arizona Desert stage, you get a strong, animated, and uplifting impression. Overall, the ambiance is kinda similar to the Arizona Desert stage, though I would say less so optimistic and more of a getting pumped up to fight vibe. The darker colors of the clouds and the sky on one side convey more of a serious atmosphere, but the catchy song pulls the stage right back into being very energetic. The Taj Mahal needs no introduction, but I'ma give it to you anyways. A UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the 7 wonders of the world, the mausoleum was built in the 17th century by the 5th Mughal emperor for his wife. In addition to housing her tomb, the Taj Mahal also includes an Islamic mosque, guest house, and formal gardens. The fight takes place outside, with your characters standing on white marble flooring covered by ornate carpet. Interestingly, the Yamuna River is going from left to right instead of vertically like it appears in most photos, indicating that we might be looking at the Taj Mahal from the side instead of straight on. The sky is very ominous and stormy, creating more of a tense atmosphere that somewhat matches with the reused King George Island song from Tekken 1. The overall direction of the stage is somewhat cohesive. There's more of a serious vibe with the stormy sky and darker colors of the red and green carpet, but the music really throws me off here. The bells at the beginning remind me that this song originally belonged to a much colder stage. I would have preferred to hear more of a traditional Indian song. It may seem odd to have Anna be here, but I rationalize it as she's an assassin, so she has to travel all over the world. She also wears a Chinese dress which isn't from her own culture, just like this stage. The Hills is Kuma and Alex's stage and has this pastel palette with the pale sky and layers of different greens, with the clouds above casting a shadow onto the ground. If you look in 3D, you can see dinosaur tracks and seashell imprints on the ground. These dinosaur tracks are really the only indications that there's more to this stage than meets the eye, and it also alludes at this being Alex's stage in a small way. According to the Tekken Wiki, the stage takes place in Greece, but nothing here to me particularly indicates that. Maybe it's because the stage music for Kuma is the same as the Acropolis from Tekken 1, though who knows, this could just be them slapping a song and stage together. Not gonna go over it again, but tonally I think the Acropolis song does work here, where you're fighting in these expansive hills with no one around. However, when you play against Alex on this stage, you hear the Fiji song instead, which in my opinion doesn't work very well. The overcast sky and expansive space, when paired with the Acropolis song, gives a very mysterious and detached vibe to the stage. Like, what exactly existed here millions of years ago to where there are huge footprints and fossils scattered around? On the other hand, the Fiji song is way too tropical sounding for this environment, and it's totally out of place. Our next stage is definitively in Greece, with the exact same location as the Acropolis from Tekken 1, but this time, instead of fighting right in front of the Parthenon, you're on a plateau overlooking it so you can see more of the structure. Outside of the Parthenon, you have a number of temples, one of which to the left I think is the Sanctuary of Artemis, arches that are supposed to represent the wall of Stoa of Eumenes, as well as a mountain which I think is Lycabettus Hill, but don't quote me on any of these. Similar vibe to the Acropolis stage with a different color palette and a little more green, but it isn't really liminal unlike before. The first thing you notice with the song are the chord changes being played with a house music piano tone and some jazzy bits. I'd describe this song as lightly influenced by techno and house. The stage appearance isn't bad, with the rolling hills in the back taking on more of a subdued blue tinge and blending with the sky, which does match with the dark green of the grass. But why is the song here so metropolitan, while the stage just screams ancient history? The song vibes with Nina's style, but why is this Nina's stage? These two elements just don't match whatsoever, and they should have switched this song for something else. Again, visuals are fine, but with the song, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Right off the bat, the Hong Kong rooftop stage has these big old yin and yang symbols to really let you know you're in Asia, along with color-changing lights and a checkerboard patterned floor. Having a stage in Hong Kong is pretty common in fighters nowadays, but this one is slightly different where you're actually on top of a skyscraper versus like down on the ground with all the chaotic signage and neon lights that the city is well known for. Although you still get some of that here with this one shaped like a traditional rooftop, this large neon sign, billboard, as well as the famous Bank of China Tower. This stage has a bumpin' energy to it that I appreciate with all the city lights. It also reminds me a little bit of Sarah Bryant's stage from Virtua Fighter 1. Song-wise, the home and arcade version of Lei's stage theme are very similar and play well with the Metropolitan theme. It's a techno arrangement with some sounds reminiscent of the yangqing and gong thrown in. However, the tonal palette is very East Asian, making this a bit of a fusion piece. Definitely a nighttime urban city vibe here, with a tone that gets you pumped up to fight. Personally though, I don't really get much of the Hong Kong aspect. Outside of a few signs and Asian elements like the symbol, this just looks like any other modern city. I feel if you're gonna make a Hong Kong stage, you either go all out with the signage or do something else entirely. But nevertheless, I do think they do a good job at conveying the energy of the area, and the music especially helps in this aspect. Kyoto at Sunset is Ganryo's stage, and the name is right on the nose since you got a large temple complex framed by this fiery orange sunset, layers of hills and clouds creating this gorgeous gradient. The inspiration for this stage is Kiyomizu-dera, a Buddhist temple founded in 780 and one of the most well-known temples in all of Kyoto. The wooden beams here comprise the main temple, which has a shadow on the roof in the stage. To the side, you can see the three-tiered pagoda. In the distance, there's a stone wall with the modern part of Kyoto peeking through. In real life, this temple offers an amazing overlook of the entire area. I've never been here personally, but it's definitely on my list of places to visit next time I'm in Kyoto. However, the exact ground your fighters are standing on, similar to other stages, doesn't actually exist and was probably just made up for the purposes of having an amazing backdrop. Speaking of which, there's also this interesting red cloud formation here that makes me think this could possibly be a mountain in the background, but this is probably a stretch. Music-wise, this stage reuses the same song as the Tekken 1 Kyoto stage, which we've discussed. The arcade version here has been rearranged so that the melody is more blended and not as distinct, which is a bit of a pattern we see when comparing the arcade to the PlayStation songs. Tone-wise, we are slammed with heavy Japanese inspiration, from the stage elements to the music. The use of color here is more monotone, with very similar shades of orange and brown, whereas in real life the contrast between the temple and the roof, for example, is much more noticeable, which is an interesting stylistic choice. Even the trees here are so dark that they almost look black. The more uniform color scheme conveys a feeling of harmony, which then pairs well with the more traditional music. Another beach stage, this time not specifically in Fiji, but similar enough. You've got more detail like the shadows on the ground and large rocks, a little lifeguard stand, and a small island in the distance. Your characters are also on the beach as opposed to in the grass, but you still have the palm trees, white sand beaches, and the ocean, which creates this lovely gradient when combined with the sky. Music-wise, you guessed it, we have the Fiji song from 1 for both the arcade and PlayStation songs. The arcade version is more blended and even sounding just like with the Kyoto song, but with different instrumentation. The impact of these changes makes the song more happy, whereas before it was more bold and brash. The colors here aren't quite as vibrant as the Tekken 1 Fiji stage, with it being more overcast, so the blues are a bit darker and the palm trees are less green, which does slightly take away from the stage direction. Because the Fiji song is so in your face with the horns from the very beginning and this continues throughout the song, the energy here is like you're ready to party. I think slightly adjusting the colors to be brighter would have made more sense in this case. Morning Fields is Jun's stage, with layers of hills and a small village in view of the match. In the surrounding area, you can see Stonehenge, located in Wiltshire, England. To the side, you can see a stone castle, which I'm assuming was just made up since there is no village or castle right next to Stonehenge in real life, just a bunch of rolling hills. Stonehenge is one of the world's oldest prehistoric monuments, built in 2500 BC in several stages. The true purpose of this monument and how the stones were transported here remain unknown for the most part, though we do know that some of the stones were moved from a site about 150 miles or 250 kilometers away. We also know that archaeologists believe that Stonehenge was some sort of temple meant to align with the positioning of the sun. In the PlayStation song, you've got bongos with this tribal-like sound and long piano holds. Then the drum set kicks in and you have the main melody accompanied by the same 2 notes over and over again with this very soothing repetition. The arcade version of Jun's song has more percussion and a faster tempo, to the point where the character of the song becomes more peppy and lively. Maybe it's just because I'm so used to the PlayStation song, but this version changes the character of the stage a little too much for my tastes. This stage gets me all nostalgic every time I play Tekken 2, and for good reason, because the theming is impeccable. A bright sunny sky, a quiet village, and just a big old open field. I can't pick out one singular reason why I'm so nostalgic for this stage. Maybe it's just the ambiance that reflects Jun's peaceful nature and calming presence, accentuated by the stage song that really ties this one all together for me. New York City is Paul's stage. Right off the bat, you can see some famous landmarks here, though the Statue of Liberty and the Twin Towers aren't right next to each other like the stage kind of implies, but maybe it's just the perspective. The Statue of Liberty symbolizes the Roman goddess of liberty and was gifted from France to celebrate the 100th anniversary of American independence. Fun fact is that the frame was actually built by the same guy who designed the Eiffel Tower. Your fighters are on a platform just sitting in the middle of the Hudson River, with the floor covered in a checkerboard star pattern along with blue squares that have stars and a bald eagle on them. I guess to represent the Great Seal. The song in the arcade version has this electronic sound to it, along with a strong single note repetition that helps build momentum, like a train just chugging along. The song in the PlayStation version is remixed significantly. It's more funk or disco inspired and less techno. The synthesized brass, flutes, and light swing in the bass go a long way in achieving that sound. There is also a guitar being played with a lot of wah effect, which is also reminiscent of funk and disco. I really like the PlayStation song, and I think it's refreshing to hear some variety in music genre, but not sure it's a one-to-one match with the theming of the stage. I mean, yes, it's in New York City, and it's Paul's stage, so from that perspective it works, but I think the colors here are throwing me off. There's no people on the stage, with a pinkish glow to the sky that envelops the entire stage in a soft light. I think it lends itself to more of a soothing tone, which Paul's theme is definitely not. It's got a lot of punchy rhythms thrown in that don't mesh well. I could see the theme working more if it were nighttime, for example, but it just doesn't quite sit right with me as is. Separately though, these elements are both great, and this difference in tone isn't as big as in some of the other stages we've seen. This is Jak 2's stage, and according to the Tekken wiki, this is supposedly in Akihabara, but I disagree here. Though I will say stages don't have official names in Tekken 2, so I can't say this definitively, but let me explain my logic. Akihabara in Tokyo is well known as an anime lover's paradise and electronic shopping district. However, the stage looks like it takes place in a parking lot surrounded by factories, and you can see white boxes and yellow arrows on the floor that help convey that. And first of all, in Tokyo, having a huge flat parking lot in such a busy area seems a bit odd, like you'd probably have a parking garage instead. Also, point 2, the lack of crazy signs and lights that Akihabara is known for. My theory is that this stage more likely takes place in Russia given Jak 2's background. In the manual for Tekken 2, it says that Jak 2 likes parts factories in Akihabara, which might be why whoever wrote this wiki thought that the stage took place in Japan. What might make this even more confusing is that the background is likely a real photo of a factory in Japan. But since Jak 2 is from Russia, I'm gonna assume that's where this stage is supposed to take place. His theme in the PlayStation and arcade versions are similar, where in the PlayStation 1, you've got mechanical and whir sounds played prominently at the beginning and over the bass line. The melodies create the feeling of a broken, choppy rhythm even though the song is played in common time in 4/4. It's very mechanical and suits the theme of an industrial area. The arcade version gets rid of a lot of the metal clanking noises and shifts it more to the background, letting a synth melody shine and is a lot more melodic. I personally prefer this song since it's less grating on the ear. The whole taking place in Japan or Russia question aside, this is a well-executed stage and you can definitely feel the grungy, robotic theming to this one, especially with the music. The factory setting also matches with Jak 2 being a robot. The color palette is also very muted, where you have this orange sunset cut by gray clouds and green tinted buildings. Not really a place I'd hang out around, seems like a place you'd clock in and try to clock out as soon as possible. Aesthetically, I like the color of the sky, but to play up that cold metallic tone, I might switch this out for a nighttime sky or maybe a more overcast one, which would add more grays into the palette. Launchpad. Presumably called so because it's a launch pad for the shuttle, maybe being one of Lee's projects. You've got scaffolding illuminated by spotlights and yellow paint lines on the concrete floor, which give an industrial lab vibe. There is also orange paint in the shape of a circle in the center of the room. Maybe this is where the ship would launch from if it were set up properly. The stage reuses the Chicago song from 1. I like the little countdown that happens at the beginning of the song, which makes sense because you might be counting down to liftoff. The arcade song does this little funky descending synth noise instead of the countdown though. It also has sections where the main melody is a full octave lower than before. But overall this song is generally still the same, just with some tweaks here and there to make it a bit edgier. Visually, this is a striking stage that tells a bit of a story with its environment. The spaceship is the first hint of Lee's wealth and technological ambitions that would play out more in future games. I also like how the stage is mostly dark, which adds intensity to the fight and almost makes it feel like you snuck into this lab and aren't supposed to be here. The little countdown at the beginning of the stage song is right in theme, and it's a very bombastic tune that matches with what we know about Lee's personality. London Ruins is an interesting one. So far, a lot of these stages have been fairly grounded and based on real-life locations, but this one is straight out of a sci-fi novel. I think this is supposed to be London, and you can tell with what's left of Big Ben all black and just sticking out of the sand. For whatever reason now, England is a desert. Not sure what kind of apocalypse came through here. You can see a beach with cliffs in the background as well, and your character standing on a similar reddish-orange desert flooring. I have no proof of this, but I feel like they kinda mashed the seaside areas of England, like the cliffs of Dover, together with London. However, these aren't that close to one another. But who knows, I'm sure some crazy shit went down here, so really anything's possible. Also, potentially there could be some influence here from the first Planet of the Apes movie, where at the very end, you see a ruined Statue of Liberty on a beach. The song is from the Windermere stage in 1, which is a lot more fitting here. It's very suspenseful and edgy. I personally would have made the song sound a little bit more desolate, maybe with some wind noises and a thinner arrangement, given that there is no one here and you're totally isolated in these ruins. Also, the PlayStation and the Tekken 1 original song are pretty much the same from what I can tell, with the arcade version also being quite similar. There are slightly different instruments being used and some balance adjustments, but no other major changes from what I can tell. I don't know where Namco was going with the stage. There are more abstract stages in this game we haven't really talked about yet, but none of them are really in this same theme. To me, the stage is creative, it's kind of nonsensical with a cool concept, but it breaks some of the continuity we had in stage theming, so I wouldn't be sad if this stage never came back, at least in the form it's in right now. Cambodian Wetlands is the successor to the Angkor Wat stage, where presumably both of these take place in Cambodia because they have the same stage song. Again, can't confirm this definitively. Your characters are in a grassy field near a lake and lined by trees in the background. The colors here are very different from the Angkor Wat stage, where everything is bright and saturated, which gives up quite a different impression. With that change in visuals, the stage song doesn't match as well as before in my opinion. The vibe is mysterious and sinister, and I think a more straightforward or bright song would have been more fitting here. Also, pretty sure the PlayStation song was ripped straight from Tekken 1, though the arcade song was rearranged. Angkor Wat had a really interesting background with all the temples and the purple sky that meshed really well with the tribal music, but this kind of looks like it could be the Lake Windermere stage again because it's kind of generic. This stage just isn't that memorable to me. The color palette and background work together by themselves, but it really just doesn't match with what we're listening to. I feel like this stage was kind of put together without putting thought into what it's actually trying to convey. Also a successor stage, instead of Sichuan, now we have Sichuan Fields. This is similar to before where you have a bunch of mountains, but instead of trees, you have a smaller mountain with stone structures or maybe ruins on top, and what could be more structures or a small village to the right. I don't think this is based on any real-life location and is probably just made up, but I could be wrong here. Music-wise, we already covered the PlayStation song in the Tekken 1 section, but the arcade song is rearranged for the better, where there's more variety in the song with some different instrumentation. This is another stage that's very easy for me to forget. Being so similar, it still has a lot of the same problems I had with its previous rendition. Visually, nothing here says Sichuan, let alone China. The color palette is murky, and your attention kind of wanders around the screen but never fully settles anywhere definitively. It's not particularly focused anywhere. On the positive, I do like the song and I think it's quite catchy, but to me, it is a little bit too upbeat for the stage. Church Sanctuary could be part of the orphanage that we saw in King's Ending in Tekken 1. When you enter the stage, your gaze is drawn to this painting due to the way that the light is focused on the central altar. This piece is inspired by part of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Located in the Vatican City and painted by Michelangelo, this particular section represents the creation of Eve from the Bible. Overall, there are 9 central scenes on the ceiling, which altogether depict the book of Genesis. The naked man here is also called an ignudi, and they supposedly represent the ideal male figure. The use of light on the stage is really great here, and in addition draws your attention to your characters standing on this very ornate flooring. It's a red trimmed carpet in a cross pattern with a gold cross on top, along with checkerboard marble tiles. And on the walls, you also have these beautiful stained glass windows. The music is a lot quicker than I would initially expect it to be. The opening to this song is pretty neat because the electric piano tone being used has a round bell-like quality to it, which is pretty in line for being a church stage. Then the song picks up with a strong beat and synth sound, which really hypes up the battle. The arcade version makes the bell sounds more obvious and you hear some organ as well, but the shift from the slower to the quicker section doesn't drop quite as hard. The darkness of the church combined with the spotlight on the altar and the stained glass windows portrays the stage in a very religious, dramatic view. The bells and the music and long synth holds only enhance that. There's just a certain weight to this fight that Tekken 2 seems to do well in a lot of its stages, just like our next one. Pagoda Temple is Heihachi's stage, and I like this one because it gives a lot of theatrical flair to your fight. The whole stage is covered in darkness. However, with the light above your characters, you can see peaks of the floor, which has this well-done wood grain texture to it. There's candles in the background illuminating stone statues, and you also have light peeking out from 2 sliding doors leading out to a garden. If you look closely on the dojo floor, you can actually see Heihachi and Kazumi's names etched on the boards. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details of this now because we're gonna talk more about this and the stage's later iterations in a future video. The PlayStation song has taiko drumming that gradually picks up in tempo and these layered synth noises and vocalizations. More of an environmental track, which makes the fight feel more intense where your focus is solely on the other fighter before it switches into the melody from the arcade song. The arcade soundtrack to me sounds less like an ambiance and more of a song where you're getting pumped to fight your opponent. This song comes out swinging from the start. There is an intensity developed with the faster tempo, as well as the call and response that is happening between chord changes and the melody. Sporadic, hard-sounding chords are thrown in every once in a while, along with slicing sounds, both of which compound on this further. Taiko drums can be heard playing fills in the background throughout, and that goes a long way to remind you of the song's Asian roots. The overall tone is similar to the church stage, but of course with more of a Japanese flair. That dramatic weight with the dark background is done so well. Definitely a great stage, and thankfully, not the last time we're going to talk about this one. Eternal Darkness presumably takes place somewhere inside the Mishima Zaibatsu. You have a similar flooring to the church sanctuary stage, where you have this cross carpet pattern with red and white roses, and this checkerboard marble tile surrounding it. But that's really where the similarities end. Like the name implies, there's nothing on this stage. Just an infinite wall stage with darkness stretching in all directions. Going with a more abstract stage for the boss fights was a bold decision and departure from the previous game, but I think they really nailed it here. There's not a ton going on in the stage itself, so your attention is instead drawn to the music. And Kazuya's theme here is iconic. The arcade song makes its intentions clear. The rhythmic drumming that opens the song is a foreboding march bolstered by somber harmonies, leading right into the main melody. The slower tempo does nothing to portray the intensity of the song. The focused, steady rhythm of the drums keeps your attention fixed, while the melodies tell you exactly who this is and what he's about. The song is a hybrid of techno and East Asian sounds, with the melody played by synthesized Asian instruments. Also, this song carries over into the Devil Kazuya stage as well in the arcade version. I should mention there's a Smash Bros. Ultimate remix of Kazuya's theme as well, which takes the motifs and melodies of the original and blows them up. The first difference is with the introduction though. Instead of starting with steady drumming, it opens with some huge harmonies enhanced by a choir and horns. When the drums do come in, they are played faster, and with triplets give it a sort of intense feel. There are some new sounds in this remix as well. An electric guitar and flute take turns, and when familiar motifs come and go, they are much bigger and louder, using choir, horns, electric guitar, and synth pads. These additions effectively and tastefully take the original 60-second song and stretch it to about 5 minutes. However, some of the East Asian touches are lost in this new arrangement, as most of the instruments and songs are pretty typical of Western pop and classical music. But in my opinion, this does nothing to diminish the main theme from the original song. The PlayStation song, called Emotionless Passion, starts out differently with no drumming and a woodblock sound instead. The arrangement is a bit thinner, which allows the weight of the melody as well as the space between notes to be more felt. On the whole, I'd say the track is very serene but with serious undertones. The airy voice synth that is occasionally used definitely contributes greatly to that effect. To me, this stage stands out from all the other ones we've seen, since all the details are on the floor and not the stage background. The roses and marble tiles makes me think we're in some sort of Western-style castle, but the lack of walls and total darkness elevates this to more of a fantasy or abstract setting rather than a real-life location. The real draw to the stage, though, is definitely the music, which, being slightly Asian influence, contrasts with the background, but I still think it really works here because this is such an iconic song. Could just be my nostalgia talking again, but this stage is pretty awesome. The final boss stage is Mirror Darkness, and like the name implies, this is where we see the mirroring effect from the Tekken 1 Stadium stage make a comeback. Funnily enough, you can also see the green and white words from the training UI show up on screen as well. They kinda tried to hide it by cutting it off, but it's really just the entire screen mirrored here. Your characters are reflected over and over again in the background against metal flooring, creating this very dramatic effect that speaks to the stage name. Music-wise, the song starts with synthesized string sections playing somber chords. The strings come and go throughout, but stay at the forefront of the arrangement. The rest of it seems to be filled out with piano and some wind noise, the occasional synth horn, and some electronic pads. Percussion-wise, you have a drum kit used to keep time, as well as the occasional bass drum. This song is unique among the rest of the songs discussed since it's only lightly synthesized as opposed to being heavily electronic. I have a hard time placing it into a style of music. It isn't Eastern, it's not overly electronic, and there isn't a ton of percussion to give away anything either. It's just a tastefully composed piece that tends towards somber and serious emotions. I do like how Kazuya's theme carries over from the previous song, but now in a more sort of contemplative way. Unfortunately for you arcade players though, like I mentioned before, this song doesn't exist in that version of Tekken 2, and you just hear the Kazuya theme carried over from the previous stage instead. Comparing the arcade version of Heihachi and Kazuya/Devil Kazuya's themes though, when you consider the fact that Heihachi is Kazuya's father, it's really interesting to hear the different approaches his theme took compared to this one. While they're both very intense, they both found very different ways to do it. Heihachi's arrangement is fast and full from the start, with hard-hitting chords and some sounds that can assault you at different times throughout. Meanwhile, Kazuya's theme is slower and the arrangement is thinner. It takes a steady, rhythmic approach to intensity and builds on that using a focused arrangement, which creates what feels like a much more serious and daunting tone overall. Wrapping it all up, while Eternal Darkness had some details on the carpet and tile, this stage has a very simple flooring as to not distract from the mirroring. The sparse environment and the light shining on your fighters makes it so you're solely focused on your characters, adding that dramatic weight again. This stage feels similar to the last one, but I would say it's more haunting with the somber PlayStation song and a very memorable stage to end your arcade ladder on. Bringing it all back after talking an hour about stages and music, Tekken 1 and 2 were only the beginning in a series that has spanned over the course of decades. While rough around the edges in a lot of ways, there is a definite charm and progression to these games. Tekken 1 had stages that were more generic, mostly just taking notes of the game's contemporaries with being a global tournament. In Tekken 2, the series began to form its own identity outside the shadow of other 3D games, where the tone and the atmosphere became more intentional. Namco wants you to know who these characters are, unlike VF, which makes no effort to do that. This was especially true for Tekken with the characterization of songs and stepping outside the boundaries of typical arcade fighting music by incorporating lots of different genres. Kazuya's theme says, "Oh shit, he's intimidating and not to be messed with." Jun's theme tells us that she has a very calm and peaceful nature, which tracks with what we know about her background. Tekken 1 was the first in the series to have stages specific to all characters, while Tekken 2 was the second. Unfortunately, Tekken 2 was also the last time Namco would do this one-to-one mapping of characters and stages, since future games had a different approach to this that we'll get into some other time.